Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me at home and here in the room? So, silencio. Okay, we start. Sorry for the delay. So I'm very pleased to see so many people here today in presence. So connected, we have also lots of participants for this seminar of our series in digital and public humanities. We have a guest here for the presentation here today, and I will introduce her shortly. Just the technical announcement. So this will be recorded, and then we will also publish it online on YouTube on our channel. So you don't have to be afraid to miss something, so you can get back to it. And be aware if you then participate in the discussion, which we hope we will do, that this will be then online at some stage. And now I see also I'm here in Zoom. That's good. So you can see me. Okay. Okay, yeah. Amanda Madden is Assistant Professor of History and Affiliate Faculty at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. Currently visiting scholar here with us at Ca' Foscari at the VDPH, and her research areas include digital spatial history, digital humanities, early modern Italy, the history of crime and violence, the history of women and gender, and the scholarship of teaching and learning. So quite an interesting and broad spectrum of interests. Current digital projects include the collaborative spatial history project Mapping Violence, which she will be presenting here today, and the NEH-funded La Sfera project, which she already presented to some of our students, which are also present here in this seminar today. Amanda is a former Marion L. Britton postdoctoral fellow in digital pedagogy at the Georgia Institute of Technology, research scientist for the Center for 21st Century Universities, and lecturer of the School of Literature, Media, and Communication. So here now Amanda will be talking about her project funded by the Delmos Foundation, mapping urban violence in Venice and the Terraferma, 1500 to 1750, with a special focus also on the application of GIS. Yeah, we look very much forward to this. We will have a discussion afterwards, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Amanda.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Franz, for the introduction. A caveat, I'm recovering from the flu. So my voice is a little bit soft right now. So yes, I will try and modulate as much as possible, but please forgive my softer than normal voice. I would also like to thank Stefano and the center for hosting me this semester. It really has been a pleasure. And it's been wonderful meeting fellow scholars and talking about particularly digital public humanities, which is a particular interest of mine. And I would also like to thank Elisa for, who's not here, but for the social media posts. Those were wonderful. It was the first time actually I'd been back on Blue Sky and for a while, and I saw the post and I thought, oh, this is wonderful. Right. So today I'm going to talk about my research project, mapping urban violence in Venice and the Terraferma, using geographic information systems. But instead of focusing exclusively on my preliminary findings in mapping, I could stand up here and show you the maps and show you the data points and show you my data sets, which are interesting and I could talk about probably for the next 5 hours. I want to take this opportunity, particularly since we're in the context of digital public humanities, to frame a project like this as a challenge for envisioning participatory public history. So during this talk, I will be talking about my research and my documents and some of the exciting things that I'm working on. But I'm also, I want to focus on the public-facing aspects and the collaborative aspects of this project. Because this project from the beginning has been envisioned as a collaborative project for researchers who are interested in understanding violence, not just me, but a collaborative humanities project. And I'm really interested in how to bring non-academic public audiences into projects like this one. Because as we know, creating sophisticated websites using engaging interactive features, sites that are sustainable are challenging websites for fellow researchers, but it's even more challenging to create websites or create projects that engage with audiences beyond our field. And disciplines outside of academia, it's a significant challenge. And I do believe that projects like this one that engage with topics that are central import, like violence, it is important and an imperative that we think about the public aspects of this project and how we engage people outside of our disciplines, outside of our fields, outside of our research interests into these projects. I actually think that that's a harder research problem than combing through thousands of archival documents like I've been doing this semester, right? I'm a trained historian. I'm a trained archival research historian. I can come through all these documents and talk to you about how many I was actually, recently I was working in some documents and it was talking about stabbings outside the Church of San Pantalone, which is, as you know, is fairly close. So we're going to talk a little bit about public engagement. And I'm going to start with these strange formations. So antibandito stones. So these are very interesting because I'm sure anyone who's spent any time in Venice has passed these at one point or another and either, like me, said, that's a really strange seat. Who actually sits on these? Or that's a strange formation, or, obviously they're trying to block people from going into the corner and doing nefarious things. But actually, I was doing some research last summer, this past summer when I was here researching assassinations, because I was finding a fair amount of assassinations in a particular section of the archive, and I was curious. I was doing some research, and I ran across several Venetian newspaper articles that talked about these and said that these antibandito stones were erected in corners to prevent criminals from hiding and escaping. So according to Venetian tourism, Venezia Today, and a couple of other sites, they say that these are erected. This got me thinking because while I haven't found anything about them in the archive as of yet, and I've been looking for various documentation, concilio to DHE, it is the case that assassination was a particular problem in early modern Venice, and I'm going to talk about that in a second in the archival records. But it got me thinking about, so what are the correlations between these antibandito stones and types of violent crime? Even if these were erected in the 19th century, there is something there in the public imagination about these that says that Venice had enough of a problem at some point in their history that they needed to put these outside of churches in corners to prevent people from ambushing you, which is very interesting, even if there is not, I haven't run across the documentation. So I was thinking, okay, so what if I could map all of these antibandito stones, pull together my archival data, and I'll talk about the documents and like what sort of geographic data they have here in a second, and map them against the antibandito stones. Would there be any correlation? So this part of this map is courtesy of Brandon Buck, a research graduate student I was working with this past semester. So he started, unfortunately, we could not afford to send him to Venice. So he did the thankless job of going on Google Maps, Google Earth, and walking through the streets of Venice on Google Earth and trying to find some of these formations. He found 120 of them doing this. I think he started to enjoy it after a while, at least that's what he said. But so he found 120 of these formations. Now, right off the bat, I just want to ask do you guys notice any patterns whatsoever?
As the research is being conducted also just on the red area, or conducted everywhere, but they found something.
This is just the red area. So he didn't find very many actually, and he didn't find very many. He didn't actually look on the Giudecca. So I don't know if there's any on Giudecca. Are there any on Giudecca?
No, I'm on Giudecca, so I'm disappointed.
Yeah, you're disappointed. Well, I do have, I can share this with you. I do, and I'll talk about this towards the end of my talk. I do have a survey I've put together that I can share with you. So if you find an antibandito stone, you can actually record it to a map as part of a crowdsourcing exercise. One of the things that sort of surprised me is there are not as many as I would have thought in certain areas of the city. Like around the Rialto, right? Because the Rialto, you guys see what I'm talking about? I would have thought there would have been more in that area. Anyway, there's some interesting patterns. And so far, I haven't actually found much explicit correlation between the sestieri or the parishes where, certain types of violence are taking place in the antibandito stones. But one would think or hope that there's a correlation. And I'm going to talk about the crowdsourcing aspects in a second. So I'm going to, just to give you a brief outline of my talk, I'm going to talk about, first, I'm going to step back for a second and talk about the larger project, Mapping Violence in Early Modern Italy. And I am going to focus on it mostly within the framework of the public humanities. And then I'm going to talk about the technical development of a project that has crowdsourcing aims, right? Or where the project is designed from the beginning to share data and have people collaborate. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is past participatory crowdsourcing. Stefano and his students were generous enough to let me experiment with them. And so I had them do a little bit of crowdsourcing exercise, and I'll talk a little bit about this. And I have to say, they found antibandito stones that I had not known about. So that's really, really exciting. So I'm going to step back and say, why is Venice a really interesting place to do this kind of spatial research on violence? Well, first of all, the Archivio di Stato, enough said, there's an amazing amount of stuff in that archive on violence in the Council of 10 and many other collections. But Venice is also interesting for its social, cultural, economic, and spatial pluralities, right? It's a very interesting city, spatially speaking. One of the interesting things that I started to discover when I first started working on this project is that there were a lot of shootings that were taking place either on or at gondolas. So if you think about 16th century guns, right, which are not really, they're not particularly accurate. They're difficult to fire. They don't aim really well. They can backfire. There's a lot of, they're not very precise. And then if you think about gondolas, so you're standing on the corner and somebody's coming by and you're doing a drive-by shooting on a gondola, like that's a very strange thing. So what's happening there that people are thinking, oh yeah, my enemy is about to come by on this gondola. This is the perfect time to ambush him. So I'll talk about that in a second. So there's a lot of interesting things that happen in Venice. And also there's, and a lot of work has been done on this, and I could refer you to bibliography forever and ever. A lot of work has been done on how interesting the criminal court system in Venice is during this period. So talking a little bit, not to mention that there's, the Venetian Empire was vast, and so there are a lot of things that come through the Venetian archives. You guys know these maps. Let me talk a little bit about the types of documents that can be worked with. So the documents vary by archive. So in the Archivio di Stato in Venice, for example, there's the Consiglio di Dieci. There's a lot of stuff in the Consiglio di Dieci on crime and violence. There are the criminal sentences. There are also proclami, which I've been working on recently, which are very, very interesting because they're the sentences that are actually getting published on the Rialto or outside places and talk about very specifically what the crime was, who was responsible. There's a surprising amount of clerics and nuns in these, which has got me sort of thinking about what's happening there, anyway. But they're very, very interesting sources. And then you have the Avogadria processi, which my colleague Andrew Vitale laments a lot of the processi are now missing from the Venetian archives, but the Avogati at least has some of the criminal processi. And then there are other, not the Archivi di Stato di Venice, sorry, that's a misprint. The Archivi di Stato in Verona, which was part of the Venetian Empire during this period, has, for example, the collection, the Giudici di Maleficio, which has processi, has criminal processi. And there are other places where you can find criminal records, either processi or elsewhere. Archivi di Stato di Padua, again, shout out to my colleague Andrew Vidali, who's talked about, and other people who've worked on some of this, which I hope to be working those records in the next couple of weeks. But there's various types of documentation in the Venetian archives in particular, or the archives of the Venetian Empire, that you don't always find other places, which is really interesting. For example, my first book is on vendetta violence in in Ferrara, Modena, and in Modena, there are no criminal records left. They're all gone. They were burned, missing, whatever happened to them. They just don't exist anymore. Ferrara, they no longer exist in Ferrara. Part of that has to do with the devolution of Ferrara in 1598. Reggio Emilia supposedly has one of the largest collection of criminal records still in Italy, but they haven't been inventoried at this point. They're in the process of inventorying them. So I'm hoping actually to look at those at some point. But they're not every state in Italy during this period has an extensive records for doing this sort of research that Venice does. The information in the documents can be very, very interesting. It's not just statistical information like you would, be interested in today. You see, you do tend to see the different categories of crime. And one of the things that we're working on right now is trying to figure out a taxonomy of crime, because the crime, for example, in some of the proclami, they'll talk about this is a crime of mortal hatred, but you may not find that in other records in Verona, for example. But you do see a fairly wide range of crimes like violent death, assault, abduction, harboring bandits. And these records almost always include the name and the descriptions of the accused, victim witnesses, and a description of the crime, which I'll get to in a second, because that's the most important part, particularly when you're thinking about the public aspects of the project and crowdsourcing. So I'll get back to that in a second. And some of the narratives are just frankly fascinating. This particular, I just included an excerpt. This is a narrative I found in Verona. It's a woman, actually, an older woman, who was found dead in her doorway. And the culprit was supposed to be her male best friend, who was described as a gentleman of good. There was no romantic relationship. They were best friends, which is interesting enough in itself. Their relationship was described as domesticamente. They got along really well, but she was supposed to be a mean person. And one day she insulted him, and she insulted his manhood. And that's supposedly the motive for him killing her. So you find interesting, the processi in particular have these really, really interesting narratives that are really, really rich in detail. But I really want to talk about the specific types of data that you can find, because that's important for the crowdsourcing part. All right, so information and documents. So a lot of these documents, of course, have the date, the location, the name of the perpetrator and victim, brief description, sentence, but they also focus on the location, of course, is the primary importance. Now, it's really, really interesting, and I would maintain that in a lot of cases, the Venetian documents, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how to make this argument, but I think the Venetian documents in some cases have a different sense of space than some of the documents I've looked at, for example, in the Tribunale Tirone in Bologna. That's just a hypothesis. It may even be wishful thinking, but it's something I think I'm starting to see as I look through some of this documentation. And I would like to take this back to going back to assassination stones. Now, there are quite a few famous cases of assassination. Stefano has wrote a fantastic and excellent book on assassinations. And I would say I wouldn't give a precise figure. I'm reluctant to get a precise figure at this point, but I would say I would hazard a guess that maybe, I don't know, maybe 20% of the crimes I'm running across, if not more, are premeditated crimes. Okay.
What?
Premeditated. Like they have been planned beforehand. Somebody has thought this through. This is not like a crime of opportunity. This is not an accident. Someone has thought, okay, it is my time. It is Giovanni's time to die, right? And so I am going to plan. I'm going to think, okay, I know Giovanni goes to the tavern, or I know he goes to mass at his parish church. So, and he does this every Tuesday. So you know what? Next Tuesday, I'm going to lie in wait for him, and that is going to be his time. So, I mean, I'm actually probably, I may actually be, I don't know, I don't have precise figures, as I said. It may be even as high as 50%, but most crimes were premeditated, right? They're not crimes of opportunity per se. And in fact, while you do have cases of like accidental death in the archives, they're rare compared to the other crimes. And so there's a problem here. So you can kind of work your way to see how the Council of 10 could have thought, you know, all of our citizens are getting ambushed on a regular basis. Maybe we should like do something to kind of prevent this. So there's some really interesting patterns that you can see from looking at the data. For example, churches were very popular places either to ambush your enemy inside or ambush your enemy near. I'm not going to go into this a ton. I'm going to refer you to, in fact, Umberto has written a really excellent article on violence in sacred space in Venice. Or, you know, Claudio Povolo's work is excellent in this respect. So there's a lot of work out there that talks about violence in sacred space and how, yes, we do know that in Italy in particular, they really did like using churches and you know, outside churches for premeditated crimes. But these premeditated crimes were also part of the spectrum of, you know, what is known as enmity, ongoing hostilities. Stuart Carroll has really written some excellent work on that, particularly his most recent book. But in Venice, it's particularly interesting because Venice makes it easy for someone to escape. So if I'm in a city like Modena, which has walls, right, and doors you can close, or although this is more aspirational in some cases than actual. Like if you're in a walled city, you can close the doors, maybe prevent people from getting in and out if there's been a crime. And you see this in most criminal cases during this period, right? Like someone will say a stabbing will happen or a shooting will happen, and then the cry will go out and they'll try and close the doors. Think about Venice for a second. How easy would it be for you to just to have your friend lie in wait in a gondola and you just like, you know, kind of take off along the alley and, you know, try and find. So it's pretty clear whether or not these antibandito stones were actually built. Some of them were actually built in the, you know, the 16th and 17th century, that there is something going on in Venice during this period that these stones hint to. So now I'm going to shift for a second to talk about crowdsourcing and thinking about, I think these stones are a really interesting way to start thinking about, okay, so creating a resource and a database, not just for researchers, but for people who are interested in different ways of like approaching a problem, like why are these antibandito stones here? For example, if I'm a researcher working on I'm really interested in shootings in, you know, 1610. Like, would it make a difference if I knew that there were a cluster of antibandito stones in this particular period, because I knew there were a cluster of shootings and the people who lived in this particular parish or favored this place were more interested, you know, they were more likely to be convicted. Or San Marco, like recently while working in the Proclamo, there's been I found some really interesting patterns about people lying in wait for officials after, you know, like After they're doing their deliberations, people lying in wait for officials. There's some interesting stuff going on there. So this is how the next step thinking about some of these things is thinking about how you create a data model. So all databases, all websites, that involve a database have a data model behind them, right? So if you think about a data model and all the buckets that you have in a spreadsheet, so I'm going to show you this. This is a data set I've been putting together for the Consiglio di 10 sentences, right? And I can show you not everyone would necessarily use these variables. These are variables that I find interesting or I'm like concerned with. And we're in the process of coming up with like a data schema that can be used across the project, across collaborators, across the people who will be working on it. But I have chosen to do it this way: day, year, month, day, day of week, time of day. You see a lot of indications about the time of day. You also see a lot of information about religious holidays. Religious holidays were also very popular occasions to strike your enemy because you knew they were going to be out celebrating with their friends and family. So where you would definitely want to put that, I would argue, in your data model. And then you have the type of crime, motives, if it's given. Sometimes it's given, sometimes it's not. Motives can be very interesting. Weapons, right? And there is a very wide range of weapons during this period. And then, of course, the city, the parish. And I could basically expand the variables on and on and on, right? I'm sure you can think of variables that I would not necessarily think of when you're thinking about how to put together a data model. So what you want to think about, so if you're putting together a resource like this, where it's not just me putting together this database, the goal, with my co-directors and co-BI and the board of directors is to put together a database that anyone could use, right? That anybody who's interested in violence in this period could go and search and play with the data and manipulate it and analyze it. So you have to think, what do I want to be able to search for in the database, right? What I want to search for, I'm working on gender and violence, right? So there are certain variables I'm interested in manipulating, but Stefano may be interested in, political assassinations, right? Or, and so on and so forth. So you want to think about that, not only that, but you want to think about how you capture qualitative information. You know what I mean by qualitative information? Like information like the descriptions, like it was very interesting. And the reason I chose that particular excerpt from the Processi, it's very interesting to think about Madonna Anzola, who is described as a virile woman and who was angry, and carried a gun around and brandished around. How do you capture that and put that in a database, right? Because you also want to be able to think through, this is the sort of information that you want to be able to search for. And then finally, the most important, because you're working with GIS, you want to think about how you geo-reference, right? So right now in this room, if you're not familiar with georeferencing, which I think most of us in here are, every point, every building, every street has a coordinate that you can pull from your phone or just pull from Google Maps, and you can put in a database, and that will show you the particular geographic point. And what you can do from that is you can create a map that will give you a cluster, right? Okay, so we know, for example, that this was created. So that this crime happened, at this point, and you can trace it by geographic points. And of course, you can also, with GIS, do a time flow model, right? Where you can trace it over time, like 1610, 1615, 1614. I guess it's a preview to say, if you're really interested in learning more about what goes on behind the scenes with GIS and learning more about GIS, I will be giving a workshop here on GIS, both a little bit about ArcGIS as well as QGIS, and you can learn, and I'll be sharing my data, so if you want to play around with it. So the next thing you want to think about is entering data into spreadsheets. So our aim for this project is to have as many collaborators as possible, because trying to figure out an overall picture of violence in early modern Italy is not the work of one person. It's not the work of 50 people. It's probably not the work of 250 people. It's the work of a lot of people. So how, for example, if I have a colleague who has data or cases that are really interesting, they want to share, how do I make it easy for them to share so they will actually share, right? This is where crowdsourcing comes into it. I'm going to talk about that I'm going to go back to that in a second. And finally, you have to clean the data, enter it into like a spreadsheet, which is one of the easiest ways to do it, or some sort of or enter it directly into the database, which is another sort of technical problem. And then you have to make sure that the data is cleaned and normalized. So I was thinking about this recently. In America, we use a different time date system, right? We put the month and then the day, right? Whereas you put, yeah, it is, right? It's very frustrating. However, most of my North American colleagues who are going to do it that way, and our databases are coded that way, right? So if I have a colleague, most of my colleagues use the other system. Like, how do you account for that? Do I get imperialist with the dating system, or do I go ahead and just say, okay, we're going to do the European dating system, this is the European project? It's probably going to be the latter. But these are the things that you have to think about, because somebody on the other end has to be able to understand your data schema. It has to be able to talk to one another. And then finally, you have to figure out a way to clean and normalize the data and then prep and upload the data to the database. So if you're thinking this is a massive undertaking, you are absolutely right. It is a massive undertaking, but it is doable if you have mechanisms set up for collaboration and crowdsourcing. So I'm going to shift ahead. So recently, speaking of crowdsourcing, so my undergraduate student found 120 antibandito stones, and I recently gave Stefano's students an exercise of finding antibandito stones of their own, and they found 21 antibandito stones, and I think most of them were not actually on the map my graduate student put together. So. And I was going to show it, but I wasn't able to log on to my ArcGIS. So if you really want to see more about the crowdsourcing aspects again and the mapping aspects, come to my overview of GIS and next month. But if you as you're creating projects like this, those are one of the things that you want to take into account. Like, how am I going to have if I just want somebody who's actually interested in it, a student or an interested member of the public wants to contribute data, because there's certainly a lot of data to contribute. How would they contribute data? And the answer to that question is like thinking about how, in the beginning, as you're putting together your project and your website, how you can create and put together web forms, right? And ArcGIS has a web form and a survey form where somebody can actually upload the sort of data that you're looking for and also contribute to your database, right? So that's something that we're building into our model as we're putting this together, is putting together like a web form. So somebody could just upload, and we've done this on previous projects before. So I think I want to spend my last five or so minutes thinking about and opening it up for conversations and questions. When you're thinking about, a large digital humanities project such as this one that is reliant on data, that is built on data, that wants to analyze and crowdsource and collaborate on data and make a freely available research resource. Like the Proceedings of the Old Bailey is a really good example. If you haven't looked at that, there's a lot of data intensive websites out there. I think it's important for us to think about, as public historians or public humanities people, thinking about like not only how we bring our colleagues into this and make it easy for them to collaborate and contribute and be interested. I do sincerely hope you guys send me antibandito stones, because I really want to know if there's some on Giudecca, actually. Yeah. I want to see if there's some on Giudecca. And there wasn't anything on Castello, I don't think. Or anyway, I would assume that there would be some elsewhere. But also thinking about like how you can bring the public into projects such as this one. There are lots and lots of audiences out there. I think as historians, we don't often, or public humanities people, we don't often think about as much as we would like. or we necessarily should, particularly in engaging them in research of this type. I think about, for example, audiences in museums who are interested in, firearms, right? And like the various different types of firearms. I mean, I've had multiple conversations with people who are just interested in the history of firearms and trying to explain to them like the logistics of like shooting someone on a gondola and how that would have worked. I still don't understand how they got the flint to light, particularly in damp Venice. But those sorts of things I think that we should be talking about and thinking about in our research. So this is kind of just a brief overview of the project and some of the things that we're kind of baking into it. I want to leave it open for questions and comments and, observation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amanda. So fascinating stuff. The floor is open for comments, questions. Those from external are invited to use the chat or just raise your hand. I try to follow up. I would have an explanation if there are no bandito stones on Giudecca Island because in the past it has a bad reputation. It was a bandito area.
Oh, so it was just all bandits. You just didn't go to Giudecca.
That's just a very poor hypothesis.
That's really interesting because
I will check.
Because I have not run across as much in Giudecca as I would anticipate, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, shout out to
I'll
information in case of
so you can upload it. Very easy.
Okay. So questions, lots of questions. So we start here. Ulrike, can you maybe come here to the close to the microphone so that people at home can pose their questions, or we move it?
Yes, just a very short question. Also, before I plan my drive-by shooting on a gondola, it's very fascinating. You showed the map of the antibandito stones that were found so far, and you asked us if we saw a pattern. Did you find already a pattern? Because you didn't yet really answer this, or maybe I lost it. And also, how was it actually used? Because I can imagine how it prevents someone hiding in a corner, but not from how to escape. It's just a really practical question.
Yeah, the logistics of it are really, really interesting. So I think the pattern that I'm seeing is I think that there are fewer around San Marco than I would have anticipated. Yeah. So you guys know right on the map where that is, right? Yeah. Yeah, Jonathan.
To come forward.
Yeah, I mean, sure, yeah. There are fewer than I would anticipate around.
Apologies, because I'm not a Venetian, so you know your city better. But I'm just saying, just to look at some concentration. It's not Rialto, but around the Carampane, eh?
Yeah.
The red light district. You've got also some prostitution. Carampane.
Okay, where is it on the map?
I'll show you.
Here we have the.
It's here.
Here,
here. That's reality.
Yeah.
This is the Carampane.
Here, I think.
So that's prostitution. Santa Maria Falls, which has also got some prostitution going on there. So you asked the question about violence and other crimes. So if you look at work on prostitution and other crimes, I think that might help.
Well, that's fascinating because I'm finding a lot of. I mean, I think we all know this. There's a lot of fights that take place at courtesan houses and Venice. So that's very, very fascinating. Thank you, Jonathan.
I'm sure you know the good work, the relationship between prostitution and
yes, I definitely need to reach out to her, but that work was really, really, really great.
Here in the front from the students, any questions?
I just want
can you come here, please?
No, I just wanted to repeat the question how they were used because we were talking about it, but I couldn't imagine how.
So you didn't answer the question how they prevented actually from.
Well, I think the answer is they didn't. I think that's honestly the answer. I think I was a friend of mine was describing this as like it's like governmental theater, right? We know that assassinations are a problem. We're gonna like at least put these stones up to say that we're doing something about it. Yeah. So I mean, I see no evidence that they were actually preventing assassinations or crime in any sort of way. But you can see a scenario in which the Council of 10 felt like they had to do something, maybe, you know. And they are uncomfortable. Like if you were trying to get back in the corner, in some cases you can't, right? Because I mean, I've never ambushed an enemy, but I can extrapolate, I guess. You know, if I want to hide in a corner, like I want to get back as far as possible, I guess. You know, particularly if I'm using, because the guns are not particularly long range, or even sport, you just don't have a lot of range, right? So you want to get back as far as possible. So they do prevent you from standing all the way in the corner, but do they work? I'm guessing no. I'm guessing they're saying more about what the Council of 10 was trying to do than.
But there is documentation that they are meant to prevent.
I mean, that's the legend. Yeah, I mean, that's the legend. It's a legend, but you know, yeah, that's a legend. Yeah.
Yeah, please come.
The microphone.
It's here. Yeah, it's fine. If you speak where
Okay.
you are, that's fine. It's fine.
Okay. Just asking, you called them stones, but can they be made out of bricks?
Yes. Yeah, you do see bricks. You do see metal. Some of the articles that talked about it said that they were actually Istrian stone, which is very, very interesting, right? Because that seems very fancy, I think. But there were some of them are Istrian stone. But yeah, you do see bricks. You do see like mortar. So they're not just stone.
Because sometimes I see them, but they are made of bricks. So I don't understand if they are part of the structure, like to support the structure.
Yeah.
Or they are meant to be like antibandito. Like in near Campo Santa Margherita, there is the church Santa Maria del Carmelo.
Okay.
And if you see all the angles are covered by these bricks, sometimes in the shape of a conic section, like
they're like rounded.
Yes.
Like, yeah. There are all sorts of, and it's very clear that there are corners in Venice where there used to be them, but they're no longer. Like somebody took them out.
Okay. Right. Is the form still opened because I can share upload?
Yeah,
okay, very good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I was not sure if they were antibandito, so.
I would love that.
I mean, we could, if you have the links, you can put just into the chat.
Yeah, I can do that.
Anyway, so there will be at the 9th of December, we will do a workshop.
Yeah, we'll do a workshop on.
So anyone interested is really invited to participate and just get in contact with Amanda or anyone from the center or the study program, and we will. So it will be a 1-2 hour thing, so nothing to.
I would mention it again in the history class.
Very good.
Can I just send it to Lisa and you guys can send it out to
absolutely.
social media?
Sure.
That may be the easiest way to do it. Yeah, because I don't have the form.
No, don't care about this now. So we will share it.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
There's another question. Yes. Yeah.
Can you please repeat or say what time period of crimes was included in the data set? So I mean, like, what was the first one or the last one that I find in archives?
Yes. So the preliminary data set, or the data set that I showed, the project itself is going for 1550 to 1700.
Yeah, and what about the corners? So what the first like dated or recorded corner, maybe they were also archived. So this first build, or maybe you made also archaeological, like something that can take the part of it and date it, what time of like a period of time when it was made.
No, I think that would be really, really interesting. And I do think that somewhere there is probably some information, even if they're 19th century inventions, there is some information on these somewhere because they were clearly built purposefully. But I suspect that they're older than that, and there's probably some information. As I said, I think they're older. There's information out there.
Yeah, because I'm interested, is there any correlation between the like relationship of the like when they building more at corners because of higher peak of more crimes here,
Yeah.
or maybe why if you're like the main topic is about not the corners, about the crimes. So like is there any like also maybe they have their own use in that period? So I'm sure that they were, and also mostly in churches they write down the events that happening every day. Are there any relationship between like historical murders, between the murders and the events, and maybe the increase of murders and the maybe like the change of power elite? Yeah. So what is like the first one there, like the crime that happened, and then something happened in the news here that in the news and in the what's written in the search event, or maybe the event and then the murder. So what is the first?
Yeah. So I think those are the big, really interesting research questions that we are interested in, because that is one just kind of wonders, like, because Venice also had a denunciation system, right? You could anonymously denounce, right? You guys seen the Focus, right? Where you can like accuse somebody of a crime, right? Or there are various ways that someone discovered a crime. It is the question you do wonder, are there certain parishes or compos where, the inhabitants are like, too many assassinations, you guys need to put up one of these stones. Like, you need to do something about this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be the dream, to find more information about that in the archive. But I do wonder, and I think you're right, it would be very interesting if we could figure out when these were erected somehow, and then correlate and say, okay, this was a really bad, couple of years for this particular neighborhood. These were actually erected in, response to this.
Yeah, because it's interesting to have like the whole picture, to see a timeline of the events and the increase, or maybe like the down of the murder. So, and the main events that happened in the Venice, and then like also like one more line connected with the building more stones, like
and that's the big question. Like, that's one of the big research questions, was like, were these erected during certain periods for various reasons, because there were concentrations of violence and certain. I mean, the churches were obvious, right? There is an absolute like long-standing correlation with violence in and outside churches and Venice. Well, I'm seeing some. I know I'm seeing outside of churches. I'm seeing outside of churches. I'm thinking about this for a second. Have I seen any inside churches? I haven't seen any inside churches. I've seen inside churches in Verona and elsewhere, but I'm not seeing, so far I haven't seen a ton of, I'm gonna have to think about this. And Berto, we should talk about violence inside churches in Venice. But there is a correlation between violence outside churches. Like, it makes perfect sense that somebody would say, we need an antibandito stone because somebody, there's a great quote by a researcher saying that like going to church, and of course I'm forgetting the reference, going to church was dangerous during this period because you knew you could be ambushed by an enemy.
We have a long queue of further questions and thank you very much. And some very valuable comments here in the chat, and the comment by David Genticore. If you are here, David, you can also unmute yourself, and so that corresponds to how I perceive also these bandito stones. Are you there?
Yeah, I could actually turn on my video if it's working.
Yeah, it's working. We can hear
Say hello. Say hello. Yes. No, I very much enjoyed your presentation. No, I just the sanitation element is also something that struck me, because I know you're working along this one hypothesis, which is quite fascinating, that there's another possibility that these structures are built as they are in other Italian cities to keep, or to, not to prevent, but somehow to structure the way people deposit rubbish in the corners
Right.
of squares and streets, and especially men having the habit of urinating there. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know one way or the other why they were built, but I see Andrea Vidali has made a comment. I mean, there would certainly be a way of finding out, either looking at legislation. Well, from my point of view, the Provveditoria alla Sanità, if they were built to discourage or to organize rubbish and waste depositing, then it would be in their statutes.
Yeah.
If not to do with health and hygiene, public health and hygiene, then certainly other legislation would tell you and probably give you at least a start date for when they were first put up. But I think it has something to do with decorum, hygiene, because that would also be an explanation for why you would see them near churches. But like I say, I have no invested interest either way. So
thank you so much for that comment.
I did actually this is a very self-interested question, and then I'll shut up. If you have any crimes dealing with water, especially fresh water, carrying water, throwing water at people, I don't know, anything to do with water, I'd be interested. But you don't have to answer now. Just
I'm happy to reach out to you. Actually, I do. It's not my case, and but I have heard some really interesting cases about wells, right? Like,
oh, lovely.
Exactly. Really, really interesting. So I have some cases for wells, so I'm happy to reach out and give you that information.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll be in the next couple of days in Venice, so maybe we can.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I'd love that. And yeah, I can reach out. But yes, there's some interesting material there for sure.
Yeah,
Okay,
do get in touch. And the comment here by Andrew Vidali, you don't see it. So Andrew, are you here? You can also elaborate on your comment yourself. Yeah, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you for mentioning me twice or 3 times. I lost count. You don't need to advertise my work. But anyway, I was just saying that one possible way to quickly find any provisions issued by the Council of 10 or any other young councils is that maybe searching the voice banditi inside the Compilazione Leggi collections in the Venetian States archives.
Okay.
That might be a quick way, because Compilazione Leggi is a very useful collections where they literally collected all these kind of laws and provisions. So there's a voice dedicated to banditi, to outlaws. So maybe if there's something about antibandito stones, it might be in there.
Okay.
So just a suggestion, though I cannot guarantee you're going to find anything about this.
Thank you, Andrew, for giving me more archival work. Andrew was one of the collaborators on the project Mapping Violence. So, and he is, yeah. Thank you, Andrew.
More question here. You had already.
I can
no, you could. Yeah. No? Condivisione?
Oh, gotcha.
To stop sharing?
Yes. Just you can see the.
Yeah, but so I stop sharing, but this.
I don't know if she needs it.
In the meantime, Ulrike posed a question. I have no other hands here. Yeah, so I try to stop sharing, but this silly. Aha, is this better? Is this what you want?
Yeah, it's great.
Maybe.
Probably.
Yeah,
no, you just took away the presentation, but I actually wanted to ask you something about your database, because you showed us this this slide.
That's the right.
Yeah, but no problem. But it's more like a.
It's on the screen, so on everyone.
Yeah, it's more like a general question. Like one is like, do you also include the pictures of the artifacts, and the other is like about. I see, for example, still here on the screen, but I can read it out. You have times of day, and then it says hour 23, 2 at night, night. So will you try to align these information for better searching? Is there any plans? How will you maybe even clean up the data more?
Those are very, very big questions. So I want to step back and say that the plan is we are in the preliminary stages of talking about the data model before we build the database. The database has not been built yet. It will be built at the Center for History and Media. So, because we use like Hugo, and we have certain sort of software that we use, but it will be built at the Center for History and Media. And right now we're talking about the data model and figuring out what should go in the data model, and precisely because of the questions you ask, right? Because it's one thing to build a database. It's another thing to think like what should go in the database and how it should be searchable and how it can be extensible and how you can add stuff. And the data model, coming up with a data model that's, meets a bunch of different needs is actually a fairly complex process. Like building a database is complex, but coming up with like how to build the database is actually probably more complex than the actual building the database. Once we figure out, what we want to put in the data model, the database will not be as labor intensive as actually coming up with like the sorts of questions and inquiries that we want to be able to do with the database. One of the more complex pieces too, and I've had this conversation a lot with my developer, is like building into the database a way for people to submit data like I was talking about, right? So if you're a researcher who has been, like if Jonathan wanted to contribute his data on students, right, in Siena, like if you wanted to do that and didn't have a spreadsheet or just wanted to kind of upload it, how would he be able to do that, right? Could he submit it to us, or could he, if he were so inclined, could he enter it into web form? I mean, and some people may want to just throw us like, and this has been something that long-term projects deal with that are built on databases. Like probably one of the better examples I can think of is the slave trade database, which is rebranded Slave Voyages. Slave Voyages has been around for, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it has compiled a bunch of data on slave voyages in the Atlantic and elsewhere. And it's been around for 25, I'm gonna feel really bad if I get this wrong, 25, it's been around for a long time, like, and it's been gone through multiple iterations. But, there are a lot of researchers out there who work on slavery and have data on slavery, and have been collecting slave data, data on slaves and so on and so forth. But, some of them, they, talking to some of the researchers on this project, some of them are note cards that somebody put together, 25 years ago when they were in the archives. So, like how you make it easy and available for someone to do that sort of work. I mean, the answer is sometimes, somebody ends up like translating the note card. But in other cases, you do want to make it accessible and easy for someone to either work with the data on their own or just upload the data. And that's been the bigger piece of trying to figure that out and building the database, because that's the important piece of it, right? I mean, like we can put together a database in the next couple of months just for our own purposes, right? That's not the hard part. Putting together a database that is usable and is analyzable and that people will want to like play around with and is user friendly, that's a really complex problem.
I think you also should talk to Daniel Fuli, who is also here in the window, because he's tidying up and making best use of database by other colleagues, also Venice-based, so with geodata. For example, Flavia de Rubes and her inscriptions and graffiti, so across the whole city. So I think there can be maybe some synergies, or because that would also be my question, because you said, but you didn't elaborate on this, that Venice or Venetians have a different concept of spatiality compared to Bologna, or what did you intend to say by this, or what was your so that's a nice hypothesis.
I mean, I think just just the different, this is my hypothesis from the different experiences of looking at the data from Bologna, being in Bologna, and looking at the trivial and terrain. Other people who've looked at the different stuff may actually disagree with me. But in Bologna, you see discussions about, okay, this crime took place outside the tavern or under the portico, right? Or maybe outside a doorway. You do have some street information, but less so. In Venice, you have bridges, or, you know, in this compo, like there's a different kind of organization on what people report, how these crimes are taking place. And in some cases, there's some interesting, I think that there's been some interesting suggestions that, you know, like, for example, and this makes perfect sense, but, you know, it's still something worthy of investigation. Like, crimes that take place in San Marco are getting bigger penalties outside of San Marco, seem to be getting bigger penalties, right? Than, you know, crimes just down the street. So I would extrapolate that. I mean, if you haven't read Dennis Romano's recent book on Venice, it's really, really interesting. It's had some interesting things he says about that, but he does say Venice is shaped by geography. And I would also say that, like, crime in Venice is shaped by geography, as well as the policing of crime is shaped by geography. So there's definitely something different going on here, but quantifying it, I'm still not sure yet.
What's definitely missing are the streets. No? So
yeah, exactly. Like, you know, or you walk along a street and it just ends in the canal, right? Or, you know, yeah, there's just it makes sense, right?
Gently warming, and so
Yeah,
they
yeah.
didn't walk in this canal, so
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was just the personnel, so the rest,
Yeah,
the boats. Stefan.
Going from space to time. You just mentioned you have a time frame. Time span.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Every historian has a time frame for his research, their research. But one of my brilliant students, Andrea, just showed me a picture of a fantastic antibandito stone, which is very complex in terms of architectural structure, including the date, which is 1757. So
wow,
what my question
amazing.
is, and it hasn't been uploaded to the system yet because it's been found.
Okay.
So yeah, this was a starting point for my question, because I was wondering, the general question is, how is it possible for you to establish when something has been realized in the 17th or the 18th century, and if you have found some others, including date, or if you have some criteria, architectural criteria or archival documents in order to, navigate around the question of the dates.
Yeah, dating of the project. That has been something that we've gone back and forth about, as well as I have gone back and forth about in my own research. Like, when I started this project way back when, you know, in conjunction with colleagues, I was very firmly 16th century, right? I was not doing a ton of work in the 17th century, but it became very clear almost immediately from working in Bologna and Venice that the interesting stuff really started 1550s. Now, there are obvious reasons for that, right? I mean, just the political reconfigurations of Italy during this period and the differences in, you know, the rearrangement of the courts. You know, the Tribunale Tirone is, you know, a 16th century thing, right? It's not, well, they had criminal courts certainly before that. Like, there are different, crime is being processed differently, for lack of a better way of putting it, during this period. And so part of it is just, you know, in terms of documentation, like, I'm an early modern historian. I like the 16th century. I also like the 17th century. Part of it is just, you know, just kind of starting this project, I've been sticking around my familiarity case. Now, I've stopped it at 1700, at least for my side of the project, because I think that there are changes also going on in the 18th century that I haven't figured out how to wrap my head around. But I'm starting to think that I should be moving into the 18th century. For example, if you look in the 18th century, there are a bunch of, like, women insulting other women. And you see it in the 18th century cases, but you're not seeing it as much in the 17th century. So there are changes in crime going on in the 18th century, at least from what I can tell, that make it probably worth it to extend in the 18th century. But there's a lot of, like, political developments too. Anyway, it's arbitrary at this point, to be honest. it will probably extend to the 18th century. Yes.
All the more so if you have a very clear criteria to distinguish.
Yeah.
What has been done before and after 1700.
Yeah. No, and it's really arbitrary, and like at what point do you like as a historian of vendetta, I could really confidently say you see less vendetta in the 18th century. So if I'm looking at vendetta, I just don't see as much of it in the 18th century. So I would be confident cutting it off at around 1720. Jonathan, yeah.
I know I've asked one before, but good paper stimulate question.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
I've been thinking of Ed Muir.
Yeah.
And the Madonna of the Street Corner.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if your project, because I'm pleased you're mapping graffiti and things like this.
Yeah.
Is anybody mapping the Madonnas of the street corners?
Yeah.
Because that would be really interesting to match those against your places.
You're absolutely right. I feel like somebody is. Yeah. That's a great idea, Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah, so anyone who can give an advice or has an idea.
This is why this is a collaborative project, honestly. I mean, this is exactly why this is a collaborative
It's hard
project.
to maintain the borders of, because I mean, it's such a wide field.
It's a big topic. Yeah. But that's why you need collaborators.
Why it's so wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, that's why you need collaborators, and that's why you need a lot of people working on it. Yeah, it's great. I think somebody's working on mapping the Madonnas to the street corner. I just can't remember who.
Do you know anything about mapping Madonnas here? Yeah.
Currently, there is a page on Instagram, but the problem is that the edicolas change education a lot in the 19th century onwards. So we could have a edicola dedicated to Saint Weeks. Now it's dedicated to Madonna, so it's very tricky to work that.
Yeah, that would be, no, I think that's
Even more interesting.
Yeah.
Another.
Yeah, no.
Okay,
That's great.
So we don't want to exhaust you too much. So I mean, we could continue to ask questions and add layers to this kind of research. So, but I think it's fine, and we have a follow-up.
We do.
So it will
If
be
you want
the
to
9th of
send
December. We will communicate this. So this will be a more informal thing, but so we will communicate it through the usual channels, and then ask for registered, so we know if there are 3 or 20 people or 50. And that will be the 9th of December. So thank you very much in advance, and thank you for this wonderful presentation and the discussion, also the people engaged in the discussion and providing interesting information and aspects to approach. So once again, our next seminar will be already in 2 weeks, and it will be Ulrike Wuttke, who also was here in the discussion, and so is also a visiting scholar here at our center from Potsdam University. And she will talk about DH locally, DH globally, so to locate somehow the various initiatives that we use to connect to the field of digital humanities, and also with national specificities, and the publication project that a group of Ulrike and colleagues is undertaking. So we look forward to that in 2 weeks, same place, same hour. And that's it. Enough for today. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice evening.
Thank you for coming.